Last time I fell in love, I thought I'd found the one, the man of my dreams. In 10 short years, it wasn't to be. And this is my story. I met this man on a dating site. When I saw his picture online, I thought he looked really cute, but it was a bit difficult to work out what he did for a living, and what of his interests were a bit bland. So I wasn't sure whether I would be compatible with this guy. But after we had spent a few messages backwards and forwards, he seemed quite nice. So we moved on to the next stage, which was the telephone calls. And we seemed to get on really well. He seemed to be quite honest about his life, his past relationships, and all the historical stuff that you talk about. We seemed to be on the same wavelength with ethics and our beliefs. And yes, it was refreshing to actually have a conversation with somebody that got my sense of humour as well. So things were looking good, and we had our first date arranged, which was halfway between where we lived, because he lived literally the other side of the country going straight across. The first date did go really well. We had decided to have a meal, I think it was lunch actually, or late lunch, and we did get on quite well. I think we had a lot in common, but I think we also had a difference in our upbringing too. But during the date, I had already decided that I was going to ask this one particular question because it's really important to me. I hadn't been on very many dates from the dating site because, quite honestly, it was slim pickings. So I decided on the questions that I was going to ask during this date to figure out what the guy was like. And my important question was, I'm looking for marriage. Are you? Because if not, that's going to be a deal breaker and we should just part ways, or something along those lines. Anyway, I don't think it was quite as intense as that, but I did ask that question. I said, look, I'm looking for marriage. I want to get married again, settle down, and be with somebody for the rest of my life. Is that what you're looking for? And he said something along the lines of, well, I'm not going to say no to getting married again. I hadn't really thought about it, but I wouldn't say no to it. So of course I took that as well, as it was. To be honest, I took it at face value, as they say. Now remember that, because remember this is the first date. So moving on, we got on really well. We saw each other every weekend. I decided to drive to his every weekend. I don't know why. Oh, yes, I do remember why. It's because he runs his business. Our family were doing the weekend slots, but he still had to be available to help out. So that was what happened during the first year. And after about a year, I don't know exactly how many months it was, but my son told me that him and his girlfriend were expecting a baby, so he was going to be moving out. So I would have an empty house. Of course, the house was going to then be too big for me, so I wanted to downsize. Whilst I was talking to the boyfriend about it, we discussed me moving in with him. So it was decided that I was going to do that. So I gave notice in at my job, and I moved across country to live with him. And I think the first inkling that something wasn't, how do I want to put this? The first inkling that I had that the relationship was not going as I had expected was when he turned around to me one day and was telling me about a conversation that he'd had with his daughter. And it was about getting married, and she wasn't married, and I think they'd been discussing something to do with it. I don't know the background of it. And she said, well, there's no reason for me to get married. Why would I want to get married? I'm quite happy as I am, blah, blah, blah. And he then said to me, well, he said, I agreed with his daughter. Why would I want to get married again? So I literally did this, turned round to him, looked him full in the face, and I said, I asked you that question on our first date. And he just looked at me blankly. And I said, do you remember our first date? I said, do you remember what I said to you about me wanting, I'm in this relationship for marriage. I want to settle down and get married again. And he said, oh, I said, were you ever going to tell me that you didn't want to get married again? And he was speechless, basically. He didn't know what to say. So I said to him quite openly, I said, so where does that leave me? So now that I'm in love with you, I have a choice, two choices. I can either stay with you and not get married again, which is going against what I dreamed about, or I leave you and we both get a broken heart. And he just looked at me. And I thought, right, okay. So, me being me, ever stoic, I pulled my big girl pants up and I got on with it basically. So I stayed with him, even though he he didn't. I don't know whether he lied or I don't want to use that word. I just don't think he took me seriously on the first date. So yeah. Anyway, as I say, it went. I stayed with him for a couple of years, and then something happened at the place where I was working, and it quite shook me up. And I came home early from work, and he was just on his way out the door to go and do some deliveries. And I quickly explained to him what had happened and the story behind it, which I won't go into now. And I said, I'm quite shaken up about this. And he said, oh, okay, well, we'll have a chat when I get back. And I thought, okay, so this has really upset me, but you're still going to go out and do deliveries. I thought, okay, so that's how important I am. He said, do you want me to stay? And I said, no, just go. I said, and by the way, I think I'm going to go and visit my daughter for a couple of days. And he said, yeah, okay, then I'll see you when you get back. So I did. I packed my stuff and I went down to see my daughter. And then I went to visit my son. And then I went to visit my other daughter. And I decided that I wasn't going to go back to Kent. Whilst I was staying with my kids, it was only a couple of nights each, if that, I think. He got quite funny with me about when are you coming home? And I said, I don't know. I'm just really upset, so I'm staying down here. And in the end, I think he just said something really childish and stupid. And I said, fine, whatever. And I started looking for somewhere to live. And that's how I came to be living in this flat. So I was then living solo, but we did get back together again. And went on for a little bit as we had been doing previously, but I was not as settled with him as I used to be. I think obviously some of the rose-tinted glasses had fallen away, and I was seeing the relationship for what it was, not him. I don't think he's a liar or a deceiver or something along those lines. I think he quite literally didn't even think about the consequences of what he was saying, or all that sort of thing. So the relationship was not as intense as it was, and I did try to have some conversations with him about where we were going, and how important it was for me, as getting married again was my dream, and that's what I wanted. And I even said to him, well, we're going to live separately for the rest of our lives, you over there and me here. Are we ever going to live together again? Are we going to get married? What are your plans for us for the future? And honestly, it was like pinning down a slippery eel, trying to get any real conversation going about it. It's like it just kept being swept under the carpet. Well, you know where I'm coming from. You've all had these conversations. And then I think, well, it was the end of last year, so we were coming up to our 10th anniversary, and I started getting a little bit introspective about the whole thing. And because I felt like I was being kept at bay and a wall was going up between us, and all those sort of feelings were there, I had the last conversation, or tried to have the last real decent in-depth conversation with him about how I felt. And again, it didn't get anywhere. So I told him that I didn't think that we could go on as a couple any longer and wanted to have a break. And the break went on for a couple of months, I think. But we started talking again, and he said he did understand where I was coming from and made some noises, the right noises about, getting married and getting a place together and things like that. So we started talking about where we were going to live occasionally, and he would come up with these ideas. And he, in fact, sometimes he even sent me estate agents' links to places that he'd found. But nothing ever moved on from that. So I think one day I just said to him, look, do you want to marry me or not? And he said yes. And then I got a text message from him saying, will you marry me on it? And that was actually made me cry. But of course, that doesn't mean anything in the real world, does it? It's just breadcrumbs, as they say. I think he was unintentionally breadcrumbing me. So he'd said this on a text message, and the following weekend he came to mine, and he did not mention it once. And I thought, I'm not going to say anything, and I'm going to see whether he mentions it at all during this weekend. And he didn't. And that's when I knew that he did not want to get married. It wasn't necessarily me, but he didn't want to get married. He didn't think it was important. To him, it was not even at the front of his mind. It would be somewhere way at the back, one of Julie's little hissy fits. And I think that's where I pulled away from him. And it took a few weeks, and I think I had several text message conversations and some phone calls. And I think in the end, it was a case of, when are we getting married? And he said, when we live together. And I said, when are we going to live together? And he said, when my house is finished. And he's been renovating his house for the full 10 years that I've been with him and before that. So I know he has no intention of doing any of that, wanting any of that. I think he's tried to convince himself that he did. And I think he had an idealistic view of living in the country, but none of it was actually in a proper plan in his head. And I just knew in my gut that another 10 years would go past if I didn't leave him now, and I would be very, very unhappy and probably getting resentful towards him and all of that stuff. And so I ended it, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. The hardest thing. It was harder than leaving my abusive ex-husband. I mean, that was scary, but this was heartbreaking. I really liked him. That's the thing. He's a nice guy, and he made me laugh, and we did get on so well together. And so here we are now. We did make it to the 10 years anniversary, but I ended it soon after, and it's now been 7 months, I think, since I ended it. And during that time, I feel more at peace with myself. I'm happier deep down because I know I've done the right thing for me. And putting myself first is not something I am really good at all. I always put everybody else first, but this time, and I think it's probably being 60 as well, has you just don't care, do you? You just don't care about what other people think. You put yourself first a bit more. You've learned to put yourself first, I think. So here we are today. I am still missing him. I still care about him. I miss the family, but I don't think he was the kind of person that could be friends. And quite honestly, it probably would have been too painful to continue as friends. So here we are now. And that's what happened the last time I fell in love. And I think that could be why I'm not in a rush to get back into the dating scene. For one, I don't like going out, being an introvert. Two, when I was on the dating sites 10 years ago, it was bad enough then. There were some yes, well, you know what I mean. Some strange people out there. I'm unlikely to meet anybody because I don't go out much. Very much a homebody, and I don't think anybody's going to break in just to go on a date with me, or at least I hope not. But I don't know whether I'm now, because I'm getting used to the fact of being single and not being frightened for the future. I'm in my 60s. I don't have a long time left in this world, and it's the probabilities are probably extremely low that I would meet anybody else. I'm still in a healing mode, and I gave myself a year to get over the relationship. I don't know whether I'll be over him in 3 months' time, 5 months' time, can't even count. I don't know, but I'm not in any particular rush. I'm healing and deciding what I want to do, I think, and getting used to it just being me. If you'd like to share the last time you fell in love and what happened, whether you've got a little story that goes with it, are you still together? Are you happy? I think it's a very personal journey, especially as we're getting older, and we're reluctant to rely on people, and we're reluctant to open our hearts and our homes again. Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? A really tough one. But anyway, thank you for listening. If you got to the end, I really do appreciate it. So thank you, and you take care. Have a good week. Bye bye.